everyone, and welcome back. As always, I'm your girl, Candy Washington. So, before we dive into today's episode, which is going to be a fun little deep dive into how Monica Garcia is the Truman Capote of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, just when I thought I would never have to report on this chick again. Here we are. And I tell you, the similarities are very scary. They're very eerie. And the last one, I was personally floored by. Like, it's very, very spooky. But before I dive into the 9 ways that Monica Garcia is the Truman Capote of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, I'm going to do a brief overview of the Swans. So, if you guys are watching FEUD, Truman Capote versus the Swans on FX. It's basically like the original Real Housewives. Like, these women were rich and beautiful and decadent, and they had their high society circles, and they threw parties, and they had husbands who were cheating, and just high society wealth and everything. Like, these were the actual original housewives before we had our reality TV housewives. So I'm going to break them down a little bit, and then I'll dive into the 9 ways that Monica is a Truman Capote. So as you guys come in, be sure to like, subscribe, share, and drop your questions in the comment box. Your questions, your comments, where you're watching from, are you watching the show, and everything else. So with that, let's go. So first up, who are the Swans? Okay. So this is according to Vanity Fair. They did a really great deep dive into it that I want to share. So who were the Swans? A deep dive into Truman Capote's best frenemies. Ahead of FX's feud, Capote versus the Swans, learn all about his friends, Slim Keith, CZ Guest, Babe Paley, and more. All right, so let's go. Much ink has been spilled over the rise and fall of Truman Capote. The brilliant and troubled author of groundbreaking books like Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood has been the subject of multiple biopics, including Capote, which won Philip Seymour Hoffman a Best Actor Oscar in 2006. Almost 20 years later, Capote returns to the zeitgeist as the bleeding and bloated heart at the center of Ryan Murphy's anthology series, FEUD, Capote versus the Swans, which premieres on FX January 31st. This time, as portrayed by British actor Tom Hollander, Capote is at war with Manhattan's elite, the it girls of his generation, after infiltrating their tightly guarded inner circle, then exposing their secrets in a salacious magazine story titled La Coquette Basquise 1965. The piece was named after the chic restaurant the ladies would lunch in and was published in Esquire in November 1975. The book was intended to serve as an excerpt from a much larger, the article rather, was intended to serve as an excerpt from much larger work, Capote's final novel, Answered Prayers, a roman à clef about the wily ways of New York's upper echelon. The book was inspired by Capote's close friends, including Lee Radziwill, who I believe is related to Carol Radziwill of the Real Housewives of New York, CZ Guest, Slim Keith, and Babe Paley, all of whom he immortalized in print under thinly veiled aliases. But after Capote revealed their secrets, the women cut him out of their lives, hastening his descent into alcoholism and despair. So basically, they did a receipts, screenshots, timelines, evidence. That's what they did to them, did to Capote. Basically, Bermuda, you gotta go. We all know Truman Capote, but who exactly were the Swans? They were very rich and also his best friends, wrote Sam Kashner for Vanity Fair in the 2012 Capote Swan Dive. Below, Vanity Fair takes a deep dive into the life and time of Capote's beloved swans. Warning, spoilers on material covered by the series abound. So let's talk about Babe Paley. Okay. So, the most dazzling swan of all, Babe Paley, was perhaps Capote's one true love. Born Barbara Cushing in Boston on July 5th, 1915 rather, Babe was the daughter of Harvey Cushing, a pioneering neurosurgeon and Harvard professor, which afforded her all of the creature comforts of a waspy blue blood life. Her elder sisters, Mary and Betsy, went on to marry an Astor, Vincent Astor, and a Roosevelt, FDR's son, James Roosevelt, respectively. The trio were known in high society as the fabulous Cushing sisters. That's not to say Babe's life was all without hardship. Around the time of her debutante ball, Babe was in a devastating car accident in Long Island that required her to undergo extensive cosmetic and dental surgery on her mouth and jaw. Many would argue that post-surgery, Babe was even more beautiful than she had been before the accident. Some girls have all the luck. Babe would take her gorgeous new face to New York City, where she landed a job as at Vogue as a fashion editor, marry oil heir Stanley Grafton Mortimer Jr. Mortimer, this is a throwback to Tinsley Mortimer of Real Housewives of New York, and became a mainstay of the best dressed list. In 1941, Time named her the second best dressed woman in the world, following Wallis Simpson. We all know about Wallis Simpson. If you don't, we could do a deep dive on her. She's basically the OG Meghan Markle. Okay. Babe had 2 children with Mortimer, Stanley and Amanda, before getting divorced and falling for chairman of CBS, William Bill Paley of the Paley Center fame. Like, this is big, big money. With him, she'd have 2 more children, William and Kate. The family of 6 resided on Fifth Avenue in New York City and built a summer home, Kaluna North on Squam Lake in New Hampshire, partially because Bill, who was Jewish, was not allowed into Long Island's country clubs. There were major players in New York City society at the time. While their life may have seemed idyllic, Bill and Babe's marriage was far from perfect. Well before his marriage to Babe, William Paley was notorious for being a cheater. The extramarital shenanigans continued during his marriage to Babe, with Paley cheating on her with Happy Rockefeller, the wife of New York governor and the 41st Vice President of the United States of America, Nelson Rockefeller. Paley's affair with Rockefeller was so salacious, it served as the central event of La Côte Pesky, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, 1965. The unanswered prayers excerpt that catalyzed the action in FEUD, Capote versus the Swans, the Esquire story included all of the sordid details of the Peleys, renaming them Cleo and Sidney Dillon. Its publication created a rift between Babe and Capote that would never mend. 3 years later, she died of a battle with cancer. Capote was not invited to the memorial service. Even after her death, Babe and her legacy live on. Fun fact, the former Real Housewife of New York City and tabloid mainstay Tinsley Mortimer married into the family of Babe's first husband. As Vanity Fair put it in Capote's Swan Dive, Babe was the tall, slim, elegant society doan, widely considered to be the most beautiful and chic woman in New York. Capote may have put it even better. Mrs. P had only one fault. She was perfect. Now let's talk about Slim Keith. All right, here we go. So Slim Keith, who's portrayed by Diane Lane, it says, and then there was Slim, born Mary Ray Gross in Salinas, California in 1916. Keith's mother changed her name to Nancy when she was a child. Keith would opt to change it again, going by the nickname Slim. When she fled the coop from a well-off family yet considerably outside of the blue blood bubble, Keith had to hustle to make it in high society. She dropped out of school at 16, and after meeting William Randolph Hearst and his mistress actress Marion Davies, found herself enmeshed in the world of entertainment. She became a Hollywood socialite, frequently partying with the likes of Clark Gable and Cary Grant. By 22, she was on the cover of Harper's Bazaar and, like her pal Babe, became a mainstay for the best dressed list of the time. Oh, sorry, you guys. This is the one with, this is a slide with Slim. She's on the right-hand side. Okay, there we go. Keith was married not once, not twice, but 3 times. Her first marriage in 1941 was to Howard Hawks, director of classic films including His Girl Friday and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. They divorced in 1949, but not before Keith effectively discovered legendary actress Lauren Bacall by showing Hawks a magazine with Bacall's photo on it, leading him to sign her to a 7-picture deal. After an alleged fling with Ernest Hemingway, Keith would meet and marry her second husband, Leland Haywood, a movie and theater producer responsible for bringing Rodgers and Hammerstein's Sound of Music in South Pacific to Broadway. 10 years into their marriage, Haywood left Slim for political activist and socialite Pamela Churchill. Yes, I made a life for myself. I even remarried, Keith wrote in her memoir in Vanity Fair, an article called Forever Slim. But when I lost Leland, I lost the best part of my life. But Keith wouldn't be down and out for long. She soon snatched up British banker Kenneth Keith, who also happened to be Baron Keith of Castle Acre. Thus, Lady Slim Keith of Castle Acre was born. She's a lady. It's giving Countess Luann vibes. In Capote's book, Keith's avatar was Lady Ina Coolberth, whom Capote described as a much-married and divorced society matron. In real life, he affectionately referred to Keith as Big Mama. But that well of love ran dry after he published his expose article. Keith never spoke to Capote again, and by some accounts was considered the chief organizer in keeping the Swans at war with Capote until the end. As for Keith, she died of lung cancer in 1990 at the age of 73. So Keith would be the Heather Gay of the group. If we're comparing it to what happened with Salt Lake City and Monica Garcia, Slim would be the Heather Gay. She's the one who was like, no, you did us dirty. I'm going to gather the girls and we will never mess with you again. So that's who that would be. All right, now let's move on to CZ Guest, who's portrayed by Chloe Sevigny. The bluest of the Bloods, CZ Guest was born Lucy Douglas Cochran in 1920. The daughter of a prominent investment banker, Guest had an incredibly waspy upbringing in Boston, a la her friend Babe. Proof she went by the name CZ because her brothers used to call her Sissy instead of sister. Befitting her privileged upbringing, CZ had appropriate hobbies including horseback riding, gardening, and fox hunting. Like her friends Babe and Slim, CZ was named to the International Best Dressed list of Hall of Fame. However, CZ had a bit of a wilder side than her clean-cut appearance would suggest. She appeared as a stage actress in the Ziegfeld Follies in 1944. She was also painted by Diego Rivera, Salvador Dali, and Andy Warhol. She's more of a ladies of London type person. You know what I mean? In 1947, CZ married Winston Frederick Churchill Guest, a British-American polo champion, and his name, as his name indicates, a relative of Winston Churchill. Ernest Hemingway was the best man at their wedding. The couple had 2 children, Alexander and Cornelia Guest, and quite shockingly for the Swans, they stayed married until his death in 1982. Guest would go on to have a popular gardening column in the New York Post before her death in 2003. She was the only Swan to forgive Truman after his expose article. It seems Guest really was the stand-by-your-man type. Now let's get into Lee Radziwill, who is portrayed by Callista Flockhart. And I'm guessing she has something to do with Carol Radziwill. So arguably the most famous of all the Swans, Radziwill was best known for being the younger sister of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, fashion icon and the first lady to JFK. While she could have spent her entire life in her sister's shadow, and perhaps she felt that she did, Radziwill was also a society figure in her own right. A New York City native, Radziwill, born Caroline Lee Blvd in 1933, became a literal princess, marrying Polish royal Prince Stanislaw Albrecht Radziwill in 1959. They had two children, Anthony and Christina, before they divorced in 1974. And yes, there's another Real Housewives of New York City connection here. Radziwill's son was married to the former Real Housewife of New York cast member Carol Radziwill. In 1988, she married Oscar and Tony-nominated director and choreographer Herbert Ross. They divorced in 2001. Even before the expose, Radziwill had a rocky relationship with her friend Truman Capote. He promised to make her a star, helping her to get cast in television to play Laura, based on the 1944 movie of the same name. Radziwill, unfortunately, didn't have the goods as an actress and was critically panned for her performance in Capote's script. She never acted again, yet she made it out of his expose article relatively unscathed, especially compared to her friends Babe and Slim. Still, she seemingly sided with Babe and Slim in the schism. She declined to testify on behalf of Capote in his lawsuit with Gore Vidal, who sued Capote for $1 million after the In Cold Blood author claimed that Vidal had been thrown out of the White House for being drunk at a party honoring Stash Radziwill. Per gossip columnist Liz Smith, Radziwill told Capote the story but refused to testify on his behalf, saying, "Oh, Liz, what do we care? They're just a couple of derogatory F words. They're disgusting." Vidal won the suit, and she died in 2019. So let's talk about Anne Woodward, who's portrayed by Demi Moore. So the most tragic swan, Anne Woodward, was a radio actress and showgirl who made it out of the Midwest to become a New York City socialite. Born Anne Crowell in Pittsburgh, Kansas in 1915, Woodward moved to New York in 1937 and was named the most beautiful girl in radio. She'd go on to meet and marry William Woodward Jr., the heir to Hanover National Bank fortune and the Bel Air estate, and together they'd have two children, William Woodward III and James Woodward. In 1955, after rumors of a prowler in their neighborhood of Oyster Bay, Anne Woodward shot and killed her husband, William, claiming that she thought he was a burglar. The Nassau County grand jury determined that William's death was an accident, and Woodward was exonerated. But the Upper East Side was less forgiving than the judicial system, and Woodward was cast to the outskirts of high society. Capote dramatized Woodward's story in his expose article, basing the character of the murderous Ann Hopkins on Anne Woodward and insinuating that the accidental shooting was, in fact, a murder, claiming that William Woodward had wanted a divorce due to various infidelities. Woodward may have been informed of her less than flattering portrayal in Capote's expose before the chapter was published in Esquire. She took her own life shortly before the issue hit newsstands. After her death, Woodward's former mother-in-law expressed little grief. "She shot my son, and Truman just murdered her. And so now I suppose we don't have to worry about that anymore." Tragically, both of Woodward's sons would go on to take their own lives as well. Very, very tragic. Okay, so let's talk about Joanne Carson. Decidedly not a swan, Joanne Carson was the wife of Tonight Show host Johnny Carson and Capote's best and only remaining friend after his expose. She was Carson's second of four wives and was married to the television host from 1963 to 1972. Capote would eventually die in her California home on August 15th, 1984, of liver disease complicated by multiple drug intoxication, but not from a drug overdose, per the coroner. He was 59. Carson kept half of Capote's ashes and in 2006 held an auction called The Private World of Truman Capote, where she sold 337 items belonging to the author, including what was allegedly the last story he ever wrote the day before he died. She was interred next to some of Capote's ashes at Westwood Cemetery in Los Angeles when she died in 2015 at the age of 83. It's giving what is her name? Sutton and her ashes with her Merce ashes. So that is the backstory of the Swans. So they're basically the Real Housewives before there was the Real Housewives. It's a great, great show. But now let's get into the nitty gritty. But before we do that, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. So, what I mean by the nitty gritty is let's get into the 9 ways that Monica Garcia is the Truman Capote of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Okay? Number 1, Truman Capote was a writer troll, while Monica was a blogger troll. So, as we know, the reason why Truman had his huge falling out with the Swans, aka the Real Housewives, if we want to compare them, is because he basically wrote an expose about their lives and published it in Esquire magazine. That is the equivalent today to doing a blog post, a YouTube channel, a podcast, a troll Instagram account. So he basically did exactly what Monica Garcia did. He took slices from their real life, their real gossip, their real tea, their real drama, and he used it for fodder in the media. So he was the first troll. So he was the writer troll and she was the blogger troll. Crazy. Number 2, they both intentionally infiltrated high society's female social circle. So as we all know, I know Chocolate Chunks, you can't look at her. I thought so too, but let me do Chocolate Chunks because I can't look at Monica. I thought we were done with her. I agree. I thought we were done with her too. But when I was watching FEUD, Capote versus the Swans, just the similarities were so striking that I just had to pull them all together. Do you know what I mean? I just had to pull them all together. Like the first thing, the mere fact that they literally did the same exact thing. He took the real life of the Swans, them being cheated on, their finances, who hates who likes who's having sex with who, all of this stuff. He took their real life drama and he took their real life tea and struggle and he put it on Front Street. He wrote about it and put it in a publication. That would be the equivalent today of doing a troll Instagram account or a troll TikTok account or a YouTube channel or a podcast, right? So it's basically exactly what Monica did with her Reality Von T's Finsta account. She's taking these people's tea and lives and drama and putting it on Front Street. It was crazy. And then number 2, they both intentionally infiltrated high society's female social circles. So, as we know, he intentionally infiltrated the Swans. And as we know, Monica intentionally infiltrated the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, particularly targeting Jen and getting in with her family and her whole circle on purpose. She even said it herself. We got in, we infiltrated it, just like he did. Number 3, they have the secret jealousy with the intent to betray for the sole purpose of fame, access, and monetary gain. So Monica and Truman Capote both had the same exact intention. I'm going to infiltrate these high societies circles. My intent will be to betray them because I actually secretly hate them and I'm very jealous of them because I want what they have. I want fame, I want access to that life, and I want money. Okay? Number 4, they both have mommy issues. So Truman Capote had a very troubled childhood. His parents were divorced, and then his mother essentially abandoned him. And then his mother ended up, unfortunately, taking her own life as well. And he always sort of struggled with that. And he felt that he was sort of avenging his mother because his mother was poor. She didn't have a lot of money. She wanted to be a part of high society, but high society never really accepted her. And she ended up truly abandoning him and then she ended up taking her own life. And it's very similar to Monica and her mother issues. She claims her mother abandoned her. Her mother wanted to be the star. And we've all seen that unhealthy, toxic relationship between her and her mother, and how her mother also wants to infiltrate that world because she also wanted to be a star. So they both have these underlying weird mommy issue. Mommy wants to be a star. I'm doing this for mommy. Toxic relationship. Number 5, they both have the same manipulation tactics. They both lie, deny, and play victim. Monica did it throughout the entire season. She'd lie through her teeth, she'd deny what she would do, and then she would cry and play the victim. He did the same exact thing. He would lie through his teeth. He would deny that he was betraying the women, and then he would play the victim. Woe is me. Everyone's against me. Blah, 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 blah. So they had a very similar narcissistic, unhealthy very toxic way of creating chaos and then playing the victim. Number 6, they both at least allegedly claim to have abusive spouses. So as we know, all of a sudden, Monica was like, oh no, I really wanted to talk about how my ex, was physically abusive to me and I wanted to be an advocate, blah, 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 blah. And as we know, she was probably just spilling that tea because she wanted a good narrative and she wanted back on the show, which didn't work because as we know, she was fired. But similarly, it has been documented that Capote was also in physically abusive relationships. So they both sort of, I don't want to say use that to play victim because I'm not diminishing domestic violence by any means, but they both had that similar background where they were with abusive people and then they would use that abuse to garner sympathy. So when they would do something wrong, they would be like, oh, but something's happening to me, So they both had that same similar way of garnering sympathy, or at least trying to, through their alleged abuse of their spouses or their boyfriends or whatever the case may be. Number 7, they both weaponize, quote, being poor. So what I mean by that is Monica definitely cried like she was poor on the show. Oh, woe is me. I'm a single mom. My husband left me. But again, we all realized that wasn't true. She was co-parenting with her husband, Mike, until they got divorced. And now she's getting $6,000 a month and she gets to live in a $500,000 home, which is good. She should, he should take care of him and the girls. But Capote, similarly, because he had a very not a tougher upbringing in childhood. His mother abandoned him. His parents got divorced. He did not have a lot of financial means. And he would use that again as well to sort of guilt the Swans and to guilt the rich women into sort of taking him in and paying for things and taking him under the wings and showing him the world. So there's nothing wrong with not having financial means and then, coming up in the world. There's nothing wrong with that, but they both weaponize that in order to get what they want. Number 8, they both use the create division between the ladies, very divide and conquer tactic. So we saw this with Monica. She tried to get everybody to go against Lisa. She tried to get people to go against Angie. And so she was really playing the women against each other, especially with the whole Meredith DM situation, a very divide and conquer. You can't trust each other, but you can trust me type deal. Capote did the same thing with the Swans. He would throw a big party and say, well, I'm going to have, one belle of the ball, one person that I'm going to really, honor at the ball. And so he would have the ladies fighting and competing in a very high society way for his attention, to be the person who's honored, to be the belle of the ball. And then he would kind of whisper things to them. Oh, well, she said that about you, or did you hear what she said about you? Or don't really worry about that. Or he would invite the mistress to the party, or he would invite the next chick to the party to watch them fight and to watch them squirm. So he would do the same exact thing, cause tension and division between the ladies, have them fighting amongst each other, and then everybody fighting for his attention and for his validation. And number 9, this was the one that was the weirdest. That was so weird to me, and it really shook me up. But they both changed their names to Garcia. I know this is weird, but it kind of shook me. So Truman Garcia Capote was actually born Truman Structives Persons, and he changed his name. Same thing with Monica, who had about like 4 different last names. She says she was born Monica Linda Darnell, and then she changed it to Garcia for the show. She just picked a random name her mother had because she wanted a family name. I just thought that was really bizarre. But there you have it. My 9 ways that Monica Garcia is the Truman Capote of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, inspired by FEUD on FX, the Capote versus the Swans. But I want to know what you guys think. What do you think about these weird similarities? Do you think it's bizarre? Do you think it's weird? Are you watching the show? And what do you think about the original housewives, the women who really came before? What do you think about them? So go ahead and put it down below. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.